We've got Tommy Ashley here, covers North Carolina, the Tar Heels for Inside Carolina and the 24/7 Sports Network. You know, a lot of excitement with North Carolina. I want to get right into Drake Maye, and obviously a huge season last year, ACC Player of the Year, over 4,000 yards, 38 touchdown passes. Tommy, maybe essentially what's next for Drake? You know, essentially now he's got all the attention on him in the offseason, and what you kind of think either things to work on or just essentially what's next for Drake.
The hype is real. It's all about North Carolina coming here. Game days coming to Charlotte for the South Carolina game. That's Drake Maye and Spencer Rattler. But Maye is from a great family, and he knows how to manage those expectations, and he's just going to work. And I think one of the main things, and we just wrapped up a segment on the quarterbacks, Jason Staples, that evaluates players for us. And the main thing is he's got to clean up the footwork. He made so many plays last year, so many unbelievable throws, but his footwork was a mess for the most part. And he knows that. And that's one of the reasons he wanted, when Phil Longo left, he wanted to make sure somebody came in that could teach him that. And we talked about for years that quarterbacks need to pay attention to Tom Brady and Peyton Manning and their footwork in the pocket, because those guys aren't athletic, but they don't get sacked. They get rid of the ball. And Carolina goes out and hires Clyde Christensen as an analyst to look after Drake in this pivotal year for him. And so you've got Tom Brady's quarterback coach, you've got Peyton Manning's quarterback coach, and that's what he's worked on all summer, all spring, all summer. And he looks good. He looks better in that regard. He still gets happy feet, but as Jason would put it for us, the above the shoulder mechanics are ridiculous for Maye, and he makes the throws even off platform. If he gets that cleaned up, he's going to be even better. His numbers could possibly not be as high, just simply because they're going to try to run the football more. But if he cleans up the footwork, gets rid of the ball quicker, the sky's the limit for him, as you know, and we'll see what happens. But we've talked about great quarterbacks, and they had great years, and then after that, they didn't do much. So that's the challenge for Drake and for North Carolina, is to take advantage of the attention they're getting and make it pay off on the football field.
You know, it's interesting to hear, and you talk about maybe some of the things he's looking at in the pocket. You know, kind of reminds Patrick Mahomes on the Netflix show Quarterback. He's talking about how he watched different quarterbacks, whether it's with Matt Stafford, his arm slots, essentially likes watching Aaron Rodgers. But he mentioned Tom Brady again, just what you said, Tommy, just not the most athletic, but just that pocket presence. And a guy like Mahomes with his athleticism, arm talent as well, is certainly watching a guy like Brady. You know, I'm looking at this schedule, and just hearing Drake talk about last year's season, 9-1 and lose the last four. Certainly winning is important to him, and everybody there. But just taking that next step, essentially, can Drake Maye lead this team to his first ACC title since 1980? I know those are high expectations, but that'll be the goal for a guy like him, and what else they have coming back. But looking at this schedule, Tommy, out of the gate, Miami's going to play North Carolina that sixth game of the season in mid-October, but those first four are really intriguing to me. That essentially that first month of the season, looking at it here with South Carolina to start it out, as you mentioned, but maybe some keys for North Carolina to get this thing started, some positive momentum. And I know, just listening to Coach, you know, talking about understanding that these teams are going to run the ball and defense will be important, stopping these guys, but maybe that first month, or even just starting with South Carolina there.
Yeah, I mean, Mac talks about the schedule being the toughest he's had as a college football coach. I mean, we know what that is. That's coach speak. But South Carolina is going to try to bully North Carolina. They did it in a bowl game a couple of years ago, and teams had success against North Carolina's defense just running the ball and then throw it when they want to. And Carolina's got to flip that. I think the defense will be better. I think the defense at times last year was decent. The numbers don't really bear it out over the course of the season. Carolina won 9 games in those first 10. They were 9-1. And if you look at why, it was because Drake Maye was ridiculous. And that, you can't expect him to be perfect. So what does the defense have to do? The defense for North Carolina just needs to be decent or average or even slightly below average, and this team can win a lot of games. It starts with South Carolina. We've seen North Carolina have a great season in not too far back. In 2015, they lost to South Carolina in Charlotte, won 11 straight, lost to Clemson in that controversial ACC championship game. So it's not the be-all, end-all, but I think for this team to build the confidence, especially after how last year ended, you got to beat South Carolina and Charlotte some way, somehow. And then you have App State, who lost a ton, but they'll come into Chapel Hill ready to play. And then this Minnesota team, I'm not really familiar with Minnesota. I know they're a Big Ten team. Obviously, they want to be physical. They lost a lot. And then you followed up with Pitt. So you've got three physical football teams out of the gate, and that will test North Carolina. I think Drake will be fine. I think the defense is where we need to watch this team. This defensive line has been challenged. There's no excuse for the performances at times, given the talent level. If you believe the star rankings, we know how recruiting rankings work. You know, you're down in Miami, you get all these guys, they're highly recruited. At some point, they have to play on the college level because what they did in high school doesn't mean a thing. That's where the challenge lies for North Carolina. I think they'll be better. I think if they can win the first game, then it's on. And then you mentioned that Miami game could potentially be a huge ACC game middle of the season.
Yeah, especially, you know, and Miami's lost the last four in the series. North Carolina lost last year's 27-24. And it's another one of those benchmark games, essentially for Miami. They've got one early on, but before where they take on Texas A&M, just to try to, you know, essentially get back or get revenge or do better than what they did a year ago when they go 5-7. So a couple of those games, and obviously that'll be a big one against the Tar Heels. Tommy, I want to get back into the offensive weapons that Drake has and get into that, but let's stay with defense because we're talking about it here. You mentioned some great points and a lot of attention on the defense and criticism, and rightfully so, essentially where they rank season-wise. But you touched on something in terms of maybe showing flashes, or there were stretches where they were fine. And I know Coach Brown mentioned that too. You know, essentially they turned it on. Those last 7 games look a lot different than those first 6. But defensively, are there things to either build upon or maybe not as bad as it might look? I know the secondary got depleted in the offseason, but just what are some things maybe that they can be okay, essentially not the level of what they're going to do offensively, but just being a solid defense?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the talent level, and again, if we go by purely getting off the bus talent level, they're not anywhere close as bad as they were last year. Gene Chizik's first year, it's a new defense. Guys are getting used to it. He was getting used to it. And I think Mac mentioned that at media days, which was interesting. And he said it before to us is Gene had been out of football for 5 years. Well, a lot of changed in college football in 5 years. So he goes back into it, and maybe he wasn't quite up to speed as much as normal, as much as he needed to be. And then you look at the talent level. You got Ced Gray, who's all ACC, one of the best linebackers in the country. He's the leader. Power Eccles is beside him. I'd like to see those guys not play 900 snaps this year, but if they have to, they have to. But it starts on the defensive line. You mentioned the secondary, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But this defensive line is loaded with 4- and 5-star guys. And the best one on the defensive line last year was a 3-star guy that nobody talked about. And that's a good thing for Kamen Rucker, but the big names have to step up. And I think we'll see that start. They hired Ted Monachino out of Baltimore Ravens to help them as an analyst, but to help them understand pass rush, understand the importance of hand placement and all that. And all those little things matter when you get to the college level, as you know. You can be just as talented as the guy across from you, but if he's better technician, he's going to whip you. And so that's what they've really worked on. In the secondary, I'm not so sure that it wasn't some addition by subtraction there. You had some guys that couldn't stay healthy, that played a little soft at times, and you've added players. Elijah Huzzy. I've talked to multiple North Carolina football players, offensively and defensively this year in the offseason, and they all mentioned one guy, Elijah Huzzy, transfer corner out of East Tennessee State. If he's as good as advertised, if he's as good as the players believe he'll be, then that changes the game in the defensive backfield because you have somebody that can lock down potentially the opponent's best receiver, and it opens up everybody to do so much. So talent's not the issue, Chris. It is performance. It is being on the same page, and I think that's what they've worked on. Now, talk is cheap in the offseason, but if they can somehow translate it and they play with the chip on their shoulder that every day people tells them they're terrible, then I think you can see a big difference. And like you said, and like I said earlier, just be decent. You don't have to be great. If they're a top 50 defense in the nation, then Carolina's going to win 11 or 12 ball games. But if they can just be 60 or 70, then they've got a chance to win 10 plus, and then you let Drake Maye and the offense do the rest.
And certainly, it's interesting, Tommy, hearing you talk about talent translating to essentially performance on field. And certainly, we deal with that all the time at Miami. For years, it's been a lot of that. Miami's got some guys right now, highly talented guys looking to take the next step. We've talked about them quite a bit on their defense. The offensive weapons with Drake, obviously, we all know that Josh is moving on, but they've got guys. Nate and Tez come in. It seems like they're going to be just fine. I just want to get your take on with what they have at receiver, running backs, essentially the offensive weapons that Drake has to work with here.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a direct plug and play with Josh Downs and Antoine Green going out and Nate and Tez coming in. And of course, Nate McCollum from Georgia Tech, Tez Walker from Kent State by way of NC Central, which is he's a North Carolina kid. Those guys are good. And I think Josh Downs was a security blanket, especially for Sam Howell. Drake spread it around a little bit more than Sam did, but Josh was always open. He's called 7-Eleven for a reason. And he was always available for Drake. But I think what North Carolina fans have understood is that Josh and Antoine missed a couple games last year, and Carolina didn't miss a beat offensively. And then you add in Walker and McCollum, and you've got a guy that can fly, just flat out fly, outrun everybody, outran Georgia, outran Washington. So it's not a lower division football phenomena. And then you've got McCollum, who's a proven guy, who's tough, a little more physical than Downs was. You got J.J. Jones, Kobe Pacer, Gavin Blackwell, guys that have done it. Those guys were special against App State, against Georgia State when those guys were out. And one name that I keep hearing that if he can just put it all together is Andre Green Jr. High 4-star kid coming out, got all the physical talent in the world. If he can just put it together. So I think for North Carolina, receivers will be fine. Nate McCollum told me back in the summer, sometimes I just want to make a play, and Drake puts it right in my hands every time. All I got to do is catch it. And that's really for what the receivers have to do. Where Carolina gets better is running the football. And that's why they hired Chip Lindsey. That's why they have Randy Clements. North Carolina fans remember Randy Clements' offense at Baylor in that same 2015 team. They ran for close to 700 yards against Carolina's defense. So North Carolina's got to be able to run the football. Again, talent not the issue. They've got 5 or 6 running backs that are capable of playing high P5 level. Just get it together, get it done. And number one in that backfield, in the offensive backfield, stay healthy.
Yeah, and Miami fans got a close-up look. You touched on J.J. Jones. He caught that long touchdown to start the game last year. Nate McCollum, as you mentioned, Miami fans have seen him, 75 catches over his career at Georgia Tech. Before we wrap this up, Tommy, fall position battles to watch. Maybe is there one or two that you're really eyeing in that there may be key position battles as fall camp begins?
I think you're going to look at, on the offensive side, running back is going to be the thing. You got British Brooks back. He's sort of a legend at North Carolina, even though he was hurt all last year and he only really showed out for a couple games the season before, but he ran all over NC State, and therefore, he's gotten that hype. He's an older guy, a vet. Will he be the guy? Will Elijah Green, the running back that sort of ended the season last year for North Carolina, great talent, super, super young man. We did an interview with him, and I'd recommend everybody watch that interview if Carolina fan or not. It's what college athletes are all about. And you've got Hampton and George Pettaway. Omarion Hampton's a favorite of mine because he's from right down the street. But I think that's the battle to look at. They've got to figure out 2 or 3 running backs to separate themselves. You can't have 5. Nobody gets in a rhythm. It's nice, but you got to be able to get in a rhythm during the game. And then on the offensive line, I think they're pretty set there. They've got a ton of talent coming back. But I'm going to watch William Barnes at that left tackle spot. Left tackle with right-handed quarterbacks a big deal. And I think that's an important position to watch. They brought in a transfer from Coastal Carolina, Willie Lampkin. Chris, he's the smallest offensive lineman I've seen in P5 football, and he's probably the nastiest. He's a wrestler. He gets up underneath people. He will put you on your back. And Mac Brown, one of the favorite quotes from Mac Brown said, Willie may not start, but he'll make who starts better. And that's what you need, especially on that offensive line. Defensively, your linebackers are set. Power Eccles and Cedric Gray are going to play. The defensive backfield set with Huzzy and maybe Marcus Allen. Marcus Allen's brother, Derek Allen from Georgia Tech's also a transfer. He's back there. Geo Biggers is a vet. One guy I'd watch out for is Stick Lane from Georgia State. He just got there in June. They love his physicality. The defensive line, Amari Gaynor from Florida State came in. If you look at Amari Gaynor, you look at a guy and you say, that guy's got the body to do anything he wants to do on the football field. Can it translate to being the pass rusher that North Carolina needed? So I don't know if it's so much as position battles, guys working to who can take whose position. It's guys stepping up that are getting the opportunity to play. And it's important to have that depth behind them that pushes them. Because if the fear of getting benched is a thing, then you're going to step up or you're not. And the guy behind you will. So it'll be interesting to watch all across the board here as camp opens in a couple of days.
Yeah, great stuff. I appreciate it. Thank you, Tommy.
Yes, sir.